Hey everybody, it's great to see all of you. Remember, the proper greeting is Lishana Tova, and the fuller greeting is Lishana Tova Tichatevu. May you be inscribed for a good year, which was the blessing for Rosh Hashanah. Because remember, part of the mythology for Rosh Hashanah was that we are going into the court and we are giving testimony about the ways that we have fallen short. The divine judge has 3 books open. The book of death, which is that terrifying part of the Rosh Hashanah service that I completely reject theologically. Although it's not a bad idea to think that you don't have all the time in the world to straighten yourself out, to straighten yourself out with other people, and to straighten yourself out with the divine. I want to just mention a few things about all of those. As a life of a congregational rabbi, I officiated my first funeral in 1981. And through my entire time as a rabbi in Los Angeles, I officiated at many, many funerals. I've been around many, many grieving families. And one of the saddest things was to officiate at a funeral of a person who clearly did not have self-knowledge, did not have insight, had no idea how they affected other people. And sometimes when I sat with a family, one thing I had to do was help people work through not just an unfinished life, but a life of a person who didn't even try to finish it well. And what I did is I used the time with the family to help them heal. And I said to them, outside in public, we're going to put the best face on this. But in here, I want to help prepare you for the work that's ahead. On that deeper level, as I prepared people, I heard stories of people who really hurt each other, really hurt their spouse or their children, and they never gave any sincere attempt to work it through. And other people are left bereft. They think to themselves, what would it have hurt for a person to say, in what way have I hurt you, and in what way could I make it better? Now, there are many reasons people don't do that. They feel shame, they feel guilt, they don't want to bring up bad feelings. But what I would say to people is ultimately, there's a lack of care for the feelings of others. Now, I saw this over and over again when I officiated at funerals. And I began to say to myself early, my mission, my purpose as a rabbi is not to discuss politics and not to discuss my erudition more than I have to, but encourage people to live lives of authenticity, especially with other people, because I've seen the damage left behind. In my counseling and talking to people, I've also seen the damage left behind of people who do not engage in lives of introspection. Now, I have my own theories of what kind of life of introspection. Some people really benefit from what I'll call psychodynamic therapy, where one looks at trauma from the past and see how it affects you. I think that's useful. Maybe for some people, it's all they need. But from my perspective, it's more or less, for me, a higher level skill than first level skills. Our first level skills are virtue, how we behave with each other. No criticizing, complaining, condemning, speaking in anger. And if you're on the other side of it, no justifying, explaining, defending, denying, trying to give more information. It's a very difficult dance because many relationships have ancient wounds that get evoked. And then the ideal there is, as you've heard me say many times, 1, 2, 3 go-arounds and get out. But if the interpersonal life is one where there is confrontational and confrontational discourse and constant conflict, people can never work things through, sometimes refuse to work things through, and the inner life is not worked through. So if this sounds familiar to you, one of the greatest themes of the high holidays is work things through on the interpersonal level. For many, many years of my life as a pulpit rabbi, that's the main thing I talked about on the high holidays, because my office was so often filled with people who did not know how to talk to each other, who never took responsibility for the behavior, had no idea of what it meant to work things through. And oftentimes this even had a generational effect because of course, children soak this up and they pass it on to another generation. I was recently talking to a young man, and from what he described, his wife, under considerable stress, was truly provocative. She provoked him all the time. He was very easy to provoke. And he says, well, why does she do this? And I said, I don't know. I'm not talking to her. Sounds like you're her toxic object. You know, people have a lot of stress, things built up, and they pick somebody, oftentimes people that they're close to dump their toxicity upon. And the person who's the recipient of this toxicity, they have an overwhelming urge, number one, to draw boundaries, to justify, explain, defend, deny, try to give information, and things just escalate out of control. And he has a couple little children in the house. And I said to him, I said, from what you're telling me, and again, I haven't heard both sides, but from what you're telling me, some of this behavior is really provocative and outrageous, and it might be true. However, you have children watching. And for the sake of your children, don't do this in front of them. Don't let them model after it. And third, they need to have a parent who knows how to calm down and be a virtuous person. So modeling virtue in front of your children, modeling virtue to every other people, itself can have a profoundly beneficial effect. One of my favorite quotes from the Talmud, when two people are arguing over property and each one has an argument against the other, the Talmud finally says, "Kashot et atzmecha, v'achar kach kashot acherim." Now the word kashot has a double meaning in Aramaic. Kashot means truth, and kashot also means beauty. Now that's a wonderful philosophic idea, but before you want to straighten somebody else out, before you want to make somebody else beautiful, make yourself beautiful. And before you want to tell the truth to somebody else, straighten them out, first be truthful with yourself. Engage in a life of truth and reflection and aspire to be, whatever this means in character ethics, to be a beautiful human being. So although I want to get to the more internally spiritual dimensions in just a moment, I won't spend too much time on the interpersonal, but I want to stress that in this time of teshuvah, this time of repair and return, most of our tradition focuses on interpersonal repair and return. And here's how it goes. First of all, if you've hurt someone, you have to apologize. If people aren't apologizing, you have to call them into account. The Hebrew word is rebuke. It's too strong of a word for many people. And what does it mean? You say to a person, did roughly the following occur? You have to have some kind of agreed police report, basic chronology. They might say, no, well, there's a few things going on. They might be lying. They might be gaslighting. They might want to admit it. You're reasonably sure something happened. One of the best indications that something happened is when people actually refuse to talk about it. They take the fifth. That's almost prima facie evidence that what you remember is correct when people refuse to talk about it. And that's very tough. But we're saying that someone says, yes, that sounds familiar. Can we talk about it? Once you have a relatively strong mutual basis for discussion, you go over what happened, and you have to make sure that both sides are heard in a kind, gentle, clear way. You don't start with blaming. You don't start with accusing. You just want to get the basics out of the way. If there's no agreement on the basics, it's very, very hard to move forward. In fact, it's probably going to spiral out of control. I don't recommend moving forward if you don't have a basic agreement on what happened. People say to me, well, we don't. And what I would say is, well, that's the thing you have to work on. Person says to me, well, doesn't the other person have to work on it? I say, ideally, but first one person has to master the idea when you want to work something through with another person, try to master the skill of producing a basic bare bones chronology, because if you don't have that agreement, it's nothing good will happen. You can't move forward. It's very frustrating for people to hear that, but after years and years and years of experience, it's simply the place you have to start. Once you get out what happened and the person has heard it, what they must say, all that being said, I see I owe you an apology. Now, let's assume this is you. What you don't say is, but what about your side? That's called the addiction to the whatabouts. If you truly want to take responsibility for your actions, you don't take 100% responsibility of what happened. You take 100% responsibility of what you did. So when people say to themselves, but I'm not responsible for the whole incident, what I say to people is, start with yourself. Take 100% responsibility for your side. Now, once you're all done taking responsibility, some people are inspired to take responsibility, but you never ever say, well, I'll take my side. What about your side? Again, that will typically spiral out of control. So one is holding people to account. The second is the apology, which is a pure apology. I apologize for what I did, A, B, and C. Once you apologize, then you say, is there any way I can make up for it? That's called the compensation. And the other side typically is some degree of moving toward forgiveness. Now, forgiveness is one of the themes of these high holidays, and I want to remind you something that I've taught about for many years. Hope to do a full YouTube on this later. Forgiveness has many dimensions. One forgiveness is, I'm not going to seek justice. This is typically with people not in your family. You don't say, I forgive, meaning I forgive getting justice. You're just not going to actively seek justice. You're not going to send a posse out. Another level of forgiveness is I'm willing to be cordial. Again, this is typically with people outside of our immediate family. This could be with, people in the community, oftentimes cousins, even siblings. I'll be in the same room, but please don't try to strike up a conversation with me. A third level is, yeah, we can chit-chat, we can pretend, we can be cordial to each other, but not beyond that. Because sometimes people use this as a way to score another point and to give another person another dig. I'll say the next level of forgiveness is actually be able to share conversation with each other, but you're reserving something in yourself that you know they're not being authentic. You know they're holding something back. That's what I'll call next to the highest level of forgiveness. And some relationships, that's as far as you can go. Ideally, there's full reconciliation. Now, I believe full reconciliation is the aspiration, especially for life partners, for marriages and spouses. Sometimes with children, we're estranged. Sometimes with parents, we're estranged. But if we have a lifelong relationship with another person that's supposed to be based on trust, care, fidelity, etc., we've got to go for that first level, work it through. Sometimes it's possible. Sometimes it's not. By the way, one thing that I said in one of my emails was, what if you have a person that does not want to get to level 1? And what I recommend is striving for moral excellence. Even in the case where you're with a person who's not striving for moral excellence, you have to do it. Otherwise, it's just going to be unremitting suffering. So that's most of what I want to say about the interpersonal. It's extremely serious. It's extremely profound. I think a great deal of the high holidays is about the teshuvah of interpersonal reconciliation. It's quite a skill. It needs a lot of virtue, a lot of your inner working through, and, profound skills in interpersonal reasoning. It's all worth it. By the way, I'm shooting an ad out here. I will be starting another outline of wisdom works in November. I think it's going to be 6 sessions. And one thing I will get to is interpersonal reasoning with each other, including a lot on when people have been wronged, when people are hurt, when people need to get an apology, when they need to offer an apology. I'll be discussing this in depth November and December. Plus, I have other things up on my YouTube page, and hopefully we'll have some things on teachable.com. All right, I can take some questions at the end about that. Now let's go into the more purely inner dimension. What I'd like to do at this point is, I'm still with all of you. I just want to bring up a document for myself, for my review. Just a little bit from our Rosh Hashanah talk last time. One thing I mentioned, just going to go through this very quickly, is the full talk is up. It's on YouTube. One is what I call borrowing a phrase from the great poet Lorca, the deep song. He published this, if I'm not mistaken, in the 1930s. And he was bemoaning the loss of the deep song of Andalusia that he traced all the way back to Hindu culture and the culture of the Caucasus. And there were unique voices, unique words, unique scales, unique melodies. And he said no one was playing it anymore. It had to be handed down from one great musician to the next, one great poet to the next. Well, I read that, and of course I thought about our tradition and what it means to have some mastery of our tradition, especially at this time. So when people think about the high holidays, some people actually know the ritual dimension. They know on Yom Kippur, on Rosh Hashanah, we go to synagogue. They might even have been there. They know that's Yom Hadin, the day of judgment with the courtroom scene in Rosh Hashanah. They don't like it, but they know that it's there. They know about the shofar, but they haven't internalized it enough to turn these into music, which means the deep song takes instruction from the tradition, but we all have to create a music within. For example, when I look at the courtroom scene for many, many years, probably for decades, when I do deep meditations on this, I just imagine myself being invited to a court date, which is why I don't recommend we say Chag Sameach for Rosh Hashanah. Everybody does it. I don't like it. I'll tell you why. Chag Sameach on Rosh Hashanah is like saying, have a happy court date. When in our liturgy, you might get a death sentence. You don't know what that sentence is going to be. So when someone says happy court date, it's better to say, I hope it turns out well for you, which is why I prefer the blessing, L'shana tova tikatevu. May you be inscribed for a good year, meaning I hope that your court date with God turns out well. How do you make sure that court date turns out well? I think in a phrase, absolute, full honesty and accountability. Now and then I, maybe to my discredit, I watch courtroom scenes gone bad in my YouTube feed where people walk in, they're not honest with the judge, they're not accountable, they're still hiding, and judges blow up. Person signs a plea agreement to plead guilty, and the judge says, okay, let's go through it. And the next thing you know, they're not pleading guilty anymore, and the judge throws it out. Says, I thought you pleaded guilty. Well, I mean, I am guilty, but there's another side to it. And the judge says, okay, this is over, we're going to trial. And the defense attorney is throwing up his or her hands and looking at the client and saying, I thought we went through this. This is your day to be accountable and forthright and honest. And now you're going to spend time in prison, more time than you needed to. So try to imagine you're invited to a court date with God, and God says a couple of things. I have your record book right in front of me. And there's a really ominous phrase in the Rosh Hashanah, in the High Holiday Prayer book that says, and your signature is on every page. Everything you've done, everything you've said, and maybe everything you've thought is all written down. It's right in front of the judge. And the judge says, we're going to go through this one by one. What you need to do is don't defend, don't deny, admit as clearly as you can, be accountable. And I think in my mind, the judge is part judge and part philosopher, part wisdom coach, part Rabbi, and says, now let's talk about what in your life got you to the point where that was what you decided to do with all your biography. That was your decision to get through that day, that month, and that year. See, I think that's the greatest thing the judge can do, is say, what was going on inside of you that motivated you to do that? Because we're not just doing teshuvah for the behavior, we're trying to go to the deepest parts of ourselves that motivate the behavior. And in higher level ideas of teshuvah, of reconciling between people, the deepest idea is look for the self that produced the behavior. Right? Now, how do we know when a behavior is wrong? Typically, when it hurts other people. That's prima facie evidence that something is wrong. And if you haven't hurt another person, are you hiding it? Because that means if you were public about it, it would hurt other people. The judge sees through all of it. Everything you're hiding, everything you don't want to say, the judge sees it. First thing the judge says is, and this is very clear in all parts of Jewish law, you must go to the person whom you have offended. That's unequivocal. It's in Maimonides and every other theory of teshuvah. But the deeper levels of teshuvah say, okay, you've apologized to the other person. You've admitted it. You've worked it out. There's some kind of apology and compensation. Now, where did it come from? And this takes us deep inside ourselves. In fact, that's the meditation I've been recommending, is the high holidays being a time of deep autobiographical introspection and looking at the history of all the decisions you've made in life, some for good, some for bad, some you're not clear about, and go into your history of decisions and your motivations for the decisions, especially those in retrospect, you were not an authentic human being. You may have hurt other people, the way you use your language, the way you conduct your life. You go down inside yourself and you say, everything I did was a decision, a conscious decision, or an unconscious decision. Even when you're not deciding, something in you is deciding for you. And involuntary decisions, involuntary thoughts, involuntary emotions. This is the time to deal with all of that. We're coming toward the end of the 10 days of turning. We're coming to the end of this spiritual retreat that I've been talking about. We're certainly coming to the end of this period that began with Elul and is closing in a couple of days. I can tell you, it's very painful. It's very painful to do a thorough cheshbon hanefesh, a thorough accounting of your history of decisions, conscious and unconscious. It's not comfortable. It's painful. But as I was speaking to a non-Jewish person interested in this, person said to me, this is utterly unique. They don't know of any other tradition that says, if you count the month of Elul and these 10 days of Tishri, a 40-day period of intense and deep introspection so that you come out of this a Bria Chadasha, a new human being. So a very, very big part of this is moving down and going into your inner life and examining everything that's there. One of the names for Rosh Hashanah, remember, is Yom HaZikaron, the day devoted to activating your memory of all your decisions, conscious and unconscious, especially the things that you're not proud of, especially things that hurt other people, especially things that you actually might be hiding, and understand there's motivations for all of it. And going down and find the motivations for all of it in the Hasidic tradition is the kind of repair we have to do, meaning would I, as the person I am now, do what the person then did? Try to say that more elegantly. Back in the past, there was a person who did a certain thing or didn't do something that they should have done. And you do enough introspection that you know, if I were back in the same situation, would I still do it? And the Hasidic idea is, no, you're a new enough person that in the same situation, you would not do it. Well, that means you've actually done teshuvah, which I like to sometimes think as returning toward the person you have not yet been. And that is the test of teshuvah. Go back to that moment and say to yourself, the person I am now would have never done that. That's evidence that you've done some real degree of teshuvah. How do you get there? I think poetry, as I mentioned last week, is a good way to start to open yourself up. Some of the themes of Rosh Hashanah that I talked about is this idea of the sovereignty of God. Whatever you're hiding from yourself, whatever you're hiding from other people, is not hidden from the divine. There's a divine light that's searching out all your hidden chambers and even reaching deep into your shadow. And that's another very painful thing about the Yamim Noraim, the things we cannot accept about ourselves, the thing for which we feel guilt and shame that we're hiding, they're all in the shadow. Now, I don't recommend this. I'm not recommending this work to the uninitiated. If you're not prepared to do shadow work, it can be very, very unstabilizing and undermining. But if you have some experience, you can gingerly enter into your shadow, pull things out, work things one by one. But anybody who's not doing this shadow work from a Jungian perspective, you have no idea what's lurking down there. But I guarantee you this. Whatever is down there is shaping your thoughts, feelings, and behavior to a degree that you can't even imagine. So some degree of shadow work, meaning going into the part of yourself where exiled thoughts, feelings, memories are pushed to the point that we can't even reclaim the memory. The memory's been lost to us because it's too shameful, painful, or wounding. There are people who say, I don't even remember that happening to me, when the person looks aghast and says, you were brutalized. The person says, well, I don't remember. Well, maybe it's good they don't remember. I'm not saying we should always remember the deepest trauma that we've had, but at some level, it's still in there and still operating. So this is a time of my idea of the sovereignty of God, is there's a light, there's a loving presence that's looking for every part of you and wants us to bring it all into some great healing. The idea of teshuvah, there's interpersonal teshuvah, as I mentioned, but there's also the inner teshuvah, and here's where our liturgy says, return to God. Now, for each of us, this means something profoundly different. Somebody asked me on Shabbat, can I give a 10-step program for Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur? I didn't evade the answer, I gave an honest answer. I said, I have no idea what you're dealing with. I said to this person, maybe like day 3 is patience. when you're working with a profoundly impatient, inappropriate person, and your issue is boundary setting, kind, clear, and firm. And I don't even know what order people need to work things in. So what I put the onus back onto this person and to me and to all of you. You have a 10-day spiritual retreat. You walked in on Rosh Hashanah. I gave the image of the night descending, but it's not the absence of the light. It's a darkened period that invites us to go into the darkened parts of the soul. I had this experience of the stars actually descending. Each star is like an angel or an orb of light. Each of us speaks to it. And with that angel, with that presence, we work out what the 10-day spiritual retreat will be like. And every single day that you do this work, you wake up the next day, it's going to be something else and something else and something else. The angel is waiting for you. The light is waiting for you. Remember, there is the dimension of interpersonal teshuvah, but there's also the dimension of deep introspection into yourself. Because I believe with this deep introspection and this deep of work of repair, we can become a transformed human being. This time of hishtanut, of transformation, and becoming a bria chadasha. That was the meaning of the shofar. You maybe remember. There's an idea in the Hasidic tradition. Why do we blast the shofar? Me'ama'amakim, from the deepest parts in ourselves, where we can't even say what's going on. We actually raise it to the divine in an articulated way, in an unarticulated way. We just say, I'm hurting, I'm lost, I'm stranded. And we just bring the cry out, and in this conversation with the angel, with the light, we gain the language so we can work it through. But first of all, you have to recover the unarticulated cry, the unarticulated kri'ah, the tiki'ah in the shofar. And then once that's out, you might say, I got the cry of pain out. Now I want to work out with God or the angel or the light. Give that some words and get to work on some inner repair. And then that was a summary of my Rosh Hashanah teaching. And then we had the 10-day of repentance. And now I'd like to get to Yom Kippur. So the first thing we do, I want to give you the 4-level model of looking at every holiday. First is there an historical textual dimension? Well, there's no history to the 10th day of the 7th month. The Bible just says on the 10th day of the 7th month, it will be a Shabbat Shabbaton. We're not sure what that means. A time of the of inui nefesh, la'anot et nafshotechem, afflict your souls. But the Bible doesn't tell us what it is. So the Bible is pretty sparse. There's no historical background. There's a very slim textual background. But we do have another text, and this is the high priest taking the sins of the people onto the high priest himself and putting it onto a goat, and he sends the goat to Azazel. If anybody ever says, Lech Azazel, let's go to hell in Hebrew, it means go to the place where we send that goat, the goat to Azazel. By the way, that's become the scapegoat. I don't want to talk about that today, but that's where this is from. You go back to the book of Leviticus and think about that. So this idea that the high priest absorbs all the sins of the people. Now, how do the sins get off the people and into the high priest? How? Confession. Try to imagine when you confess a sin deeply and you work it through with another human being, the sin is lifted off of you. It's just taken from you. You're lighter. We actually discharge the chet onto the high priest, who's the medium between the people and the goat to Azazel. It's a very strange ritual. By the way, when people look at it, they say, that's really strange. I don't like it. I say, what if it were true? What if you could go inside and your guilt, your shame, your trouble with yourself, as long as you spoke it into the divine and repair things with other people, it just lifts off of you. The burden is taken away from you. And the high priest says, hand me all of it. I'll hold all of it. What an act of love and grace. And then this poor goat is sitting there. He says, I'm going to put it all on the goat. And the goat goes to Gehinom. That's a strange term. Gehinom. Hinom's a guy. His name is Hinnom. And Ge means a gulch. And they run the goat off to Hinnom's gulch. How do you say Gehinom in Hebrew? Gehenim. So, which is the word for hell. So you look at this, and just try to imagine that the goat goes down to Gehenna. In a way, taking your sins to the place they came from. Try to imagine that our sins, minimally meaning an act of alienation from the divine, from our souls, and from other people. Where does it come from? It comes from some part of a perverse nature that we call the Yetzer Hara. We don't know how it got there. We know that it's operating, and we know we have to fight against it. So try to imagine somehow or another, I'm speaking very metaphorically here, this is not theological, it's metaphoric, poetic, that somehow the Yetzer Hara is funded by Gehenna. And Gehenna gets into you. And you make a private hell for yourself. You make a private hell for other people. Like we are emissaries, evangelists of hell. That's what the Yetzer Hara does. That's its game. That's what it's up to. And then you say to yourself, enough. Enough of creating hell for myself. Enough creating hell for other people. In this incredible Yom Kippur ritual, the high priest puts it on the Seir Azazel, the goat that runs down into Hinnom's Gulch or runs down into hell. You'll give the metaphors. These are unusual metaphors, but it's real. It goes down in there in a way. The big, whoever the big gangster in charge of hell, it says, what, it's back? I thought I sent that up into people. I wanted them to make their lives hell. How did it get back here? And the goat says, I was there, I can tell you. And we're going to call it Satan for this point. So Satan, well, how did it get here? Well, they have this day. They have this day where all of the people admit their sins. Everybody's honest. They're like talking straight to God. And they're not hiding anything. And they work things through with each other. And the sin gets lifted off of them, goes to the high priest, and he throws it onto me and sent me back down to you. And Satan says, I got to take care of this. You actually say they actually do this one day a year? It's all clear. He says, yeah. So what does Satan say? Okay, I know what to do. Make this day, Yom Kippur, as meaningless as possible. Okay, now I'm going to be a little bit unkind-hearted. The rabbis are going to talk about politics, social policy. The idea that the job of the clergy is like the job of the high priest of old, which is go down, find those parts of yourself that are alienating you from yourself. One of the ways I translate sin is alienation. You're alienated from yourself. You're alienated from God. You're alienated from other people. You can name this stuff. You bring it up to the surface, and then Yom Kippur acts like a kind of mikveh, a kind of ritual bath. It can't reach down inside of you, but you can lift it up to the surface, and the ritual bath just takes it away. It's washed away. So try to imagine we have this one day at the end of this 10-day period where you met with the judge, you've reconciled yourself with other people, you worked things through, you've confessed, you've admitted, right? All these things are being raised up. You walk into Yom Kippur, which is a big mikveh, a big ritual bath that's washed away from you, put onto the scapegoat, takes it down to Hinnom's Gulch, into Gehenna, and the devil is there saying, what, it's back? Yeah, it's back. These people actually discharged it. That's one of the metaphoric poems of this day. All right, so what's another? So therefore, confession is the main practice of the day. We don't know where it came from. There's no history. It says, "V'initem et nafshotechem." We don't know what afflicting the soul means. Fasting, not wearing shoes, etc., etc. But you know what? In the book of Isaiah, if you look in a High Holiday prayer book, and you look at the prophetic portion for the morning service, look at Isaiah. He says, "I don't care about your fasting. I don't care about your beating your breast. I don't care about your words. I care about what goes on inside of you." Even Isaiah, back in the time of the Bible, was on to people. The fact that you walk into synagogue, okay, you took your leather shoes off and you put your Nikes on. Great. You're not eating in front of anybody. All right, at least you tried. You do whatever it takes to look Yom Kippurish. And you walk in there and you're beating your breast, al chet shechatan, all that. Try to imagine that the divine is looking at you and says, I see right through you. You're not doing anything. You're going through motions. As it says in the Shabbat Shuvah Haftarah that we just read on Shabbat, it says, Kir'u et levavachem velo et bigdechem. Tear your hearts, not your clothes. People rend their garments. I'm so sorry. I'm so pitiful. And God says, tear your heart and not your clothes. And try to imagine that when you go through this day, this coming Wednesday night and Thursday, the divine is looking at every single one of us and saying, are you tearing your heart? Are you tormenting yourself with being honest with yourself? Because if not, I can see it. You might as well have just stayed home and not come to this retreat, because this retreat is for honest people who can go through the pain of the pain of the labor pains of birthing a new self. So one of the major practices of Yom Kippur, in fact, the major practice of Yom Kippur is confession. Now, beyond the confession, of course, is the Kol Nidre. What a misunderstood little ritual. I suggest you go to a traditional prayer book. You can find many online. What is this Kol Nidre? People stand in awe of Kol Nidre. It actually began as something very small and actually despised by the rabbis of every generation. Why? What does it say? Typically, the Kol Nidre, which means all vows, was done before the Yom Kippur service, where a person would meet with two wise people, and they'd say, all vows, promises, etc., 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 etc. Okay, here's the kicker. That I might make from this year till next year, it's future-oriented, I repent of them now. Now, why do the rabbis hate it? Because you can't do preemptive teshuvah. You can't say, you know what? All the horrible things that and vows that I might break from next year to this year, I want to just now say right now, I repent of all of them. Now, the rabbinical story says it doesn't work that way. If you break a vow, you repent, but you can't proactively repent. Okay, this is one of the strangest things. So when this folk formula first came out, it's in pretty uneven Aramaic. The rabbis of the period said, you people have to stop saying this. Well, you can't stop the people, vox populi, and they started saying it, so the rabbis said, okay, we'll get ahead of it. But they want to put it in the past tense. For all the vows and promises that I broke last year, and people said, no, we want it in the future tense. The ancient rabbis had to back down. So they went in the prayer book. When I grew up in my conservative congregation, they said it's about the conversos, the Jews who were forced to convert, except that it was written in the 9th century, so it wasn't written about the conversos. But for your average conservative Jew, it's actually scandalizing that we have something in a prayer book that says, you can say to God, everything that I vowed to do, all the vows that I make, from this year to next, I repent of them. So most prayer books just do not want you to see that and read it, which is why I translate kind of literally in our old prayer book. Maybe you have one around, but you can go online and take a look. Now, what is the deeper meaning behind proactive, preemptive renunciation of vows? I really had to think about this. And I'll tell you when I came to the realization, I thought I understood until I became the juniorest rabbi, number 5 rabbi at Stephen Weiss Temple, and I was officiating at bar and bat mitzvahs and funerals and so forth, and I got to meet the phenomenon, you'll excuse the metaphor, of the soccer mom, right? And they were just strung out, one soccer game to the next, and then they'd have to run in this and run that and just frazzled. And one person said to me, you know what? I'm already done with all of this. I don't want to take care of my kids. I don't want to have to put my makeup on before I go out, even for a run. I don't want to have to get home before the housekeeper and clean the house before the housekeeper gets there, so she won't be mad at me. I don't want to take care of my husband who won't stop criticizing me. I don't want to take care of anybody. From this year to the next, I want them to leave me alone. I want a break. I want to feel myself. I want to remember who I was when I was 20, 21 years old. How did I even get into this? I never chose this life. I remember one woman say, it happened to me. How do I find the person I used to be? Boom. Wow. The Kol Nidre. From this year to the next, I want a break. I quit everything. I'm not driving. This is back in the time of station wagons. Station wagon is gone. I'm not cleaning up for the housekeeper, and I'm not kowtowing my incessantly demanding husband. I thought, wow, Kol Nidre, right? So now what happens in Kol Nidre? You go in and you say, I quit. This was, I think, again, this is one of my interpretations of Kol Nidre. I quit. I'm going to quit trying to please people. I quit all my commitments, all my promises. Everybody just leave me alone so I can find my way to being myself. Well, you do have 24 hours. Theoretically, unless you're a rabbi or cantor, you got 24 hours. Nowhere to go, nothing to do. but go into yourself. And by the way, even when we were conducting services, I made sure I had plenty of time. I prepared myself to do my own inner work. So for me, from a spiritual approach to the high holidays, whatever you think of the Kol Nidre, try to imagine your soul is saying you need to quit all of these things where people are just pulling you from yourself, even inner forces that are pulling you from yourself, commitments you've made to yourself, vows you've made to yourself. And you say for one day, look, everybody be quiet. I can't even feel my soul. I don't even know who I am. I need all these voices to go quiet so I can have a deep inner moment with my soul, a deep conversation with my soul. In my metaphor of the retreat, the angel, the light, is in conversation with you and says, it's just about you today. It's just about you. Forget everybody else. All your vows, promises, and commitments, right? We're letting them go for today because right now it's just about you. Now, here's what happens. Again, I know we're going to be, you take your shoes off right before the service starts, which way you're stepping out of the world. You're going to put your shoes back on at the end if you're in a traditional place. Let's say you have 24, 25 hours before your shoes back on. Now, I know when I begin Yom Kippur that I'm going to be putting my shoes back on. I'm going to step back into my life. But for that 24-hour period, it is my, if we can get there, my authentic self, my pure self, before my own behavior that hurts other people, before other people's behavior that hurt me, a deep, deep part of myself, which is my essence, my core. And from that, there's a world where I've hurt people and they've hurt me, but there's something to me that is anterior to all of that. Now, the second great ritual of Yom Kippur is the confessional. Now, most of the confessional has to do with, not that I didn't daven mincha one day on Shabbos, or that I eat a little piece of unkosher chicken. You're not going to find that in the confessional. It's almost all interpersonal confessional. And that's why I say, take care of that stuff right away. Don't back down. Get that out of your way. Hopefully the month of Elul, hopefully around Rosh Hashanah. Don't drag that into Yom Kippur. So when you look at those confessions, you say, thank you for the guidance, but I got a lot of this done. I've contemplated. It's one reason I say to people, study the Yom Kippur confessional before Yom Kippur. Get through all of it. Go as far as you can. So on Yom Kippur, you're not bothering yourself with being a person who's sadly sufficient in good character. Truly, the confessional is with people with poor character that want to raise their game a little bit. Ideally, for all of you, we've been working on that all year. You go into the retreat. Maybe that's the first thing you do, is go through the confessional on Yom Kippur. With all that out of the way, there's something the liturgy doesn't talk about. And that's why I want to share it with you. The idea that with the, as it were, confessional out of the way, you've taken care of the interpersonal. You've taken care of it as far as you can. And many people were very moved when I say about people who can't engage in the interpersonal work with you. Ideally, you just forgive them. It's their story. For whatever reason, they can't get there. If you stay in judgment of them, it's going to be very painful. It's going to be a certain kind of a hell. It's very difficult to do. I think we have to aim toward moral excellence so we can get to the point where that's their story. That's their private hell. But I need to transcend this. I need to go a higher place, a higher, what I call empathetic understanding and grace. Many Jews have never heard this idea before of grace and forgiveness. They say, that sounds Christian. I say, it's in the Psalms. It's all over our tradition. We just don't practice it, which is one reason on Rosh Hashanah, I talked about empathetic, composed for another 1,000 or so years. But anyway, who cares about chronology when you're talking about Midrash? So the people are saying, Shema Yisrael down below, but Moses is up in heaven. And he's hearing what the angels say. Now, the angels cannot say, Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, because they're not Israelites. I don't know if anybody knew this, but angels are not Jewish. Just store that information. It's going to become important later. Even further, God is not Jewish. Many Jewish people don't actually know that. Okay, back to my talk.
Can you repeat the last few minutes because we had a little glitch?
Okay, I'm going to repeat the last few minutes, starting with the talk on the Shema. Okay, so one of the interesting little indications that we become like angels is a tradition on saying the Shema Yisrael. So many of you are familiar. During our service, we say, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, Adonai our God, Adonai is one. And then we whisper, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Why? Because there's a tradition. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai. He's up in the court of the angels. Down below, people are saying the Shema, even though the liturgy has not yet been written for another 1,000 years. Doesn't matter. What does time matter in a midrash? And and he's listening to the angels when the people say the Shema. Now, the angels cannot say the Shema because they're not Israelites. They can't say Shema Israel because they're not Israelites. The angels are not Jewish, nor is God Jewish, by the way. In any case, Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, and the people say, so you were up in heaven when we said the Shema? He says, yes, I was there the whole time. They said, what do the angels say when we say the Shema? Moses looks around and says, these angels are very jealous, and if I tell them that I am telling you what they said, they're going to kill me and everybody here. They're violent, they're dangerous, they're punitive, they're small-minded, and you don't want to steal from an angel. You say, okay, we get it. Tell us in a whisper. He goes, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. He's now whisper this. So, having studied this midrash, which not that many people know, whenever I'm going to synagogue on a regular basis now, and there's people saying Shema Yisrael, and they go Baruch Shem Kavod, I really chuckle internally, which means let's whisper this so the angels don't hear us and kill every single one of us. So that's my private chuckle. People say, why are you chuckling during the Shema? I shouldn't talk about it. In any case, one day of the year, we say the Shema Yisrael, and we say Baruch Shem Kavod out loud. Shema Yisrael, and we say Baruch Shem Kavod. Now the angels are going, what? But we've become angels, so we get to say it. And you say, yeah, but you're not real angels. Yeah, for one day we're real angels, so you can't touch us. You say, well, if we ever hear you saying it when you get back down there, don't worry, we're going to whisper. We'll be back here next year. We're going to say it as loud as we can, and you can't touch us. Now, this is I know, this is a very obscure rabbinic Jewish joke, but when you know it, and then we actually practice it, and all year we say Baruch Shem Kavod in a whisper, we're playing along with the joke. We don't want the angels to hear us. And then on Yom Kippur, you say it loud. Why? Because we become angels. Okay, that's my little animad version about that. Now we'll take it more deeply. Try to imagine you've actually lifted yourself out of your body. Right? It's like the Kol Nidra I was talking about. You've lifted yourself out of your pain, out of your wounds, out of your needs, expectations, entitlements, demands, your trauma, your story, your narrative, out of everything, and you become as pure as an angel. It's as if you lifted yourself out of your body and you ascend, and it's you without any of that. Who are you? What does your neshama tohara, your pure soul, look like? What does it feel to be unburdened by all the pain and all the regret and all the wounds and all the trauma and all the narratives and the stories and stuff people throw on us and things that we throw on other people and they throw on us? You're done with it all for 24 hours. So you walk in, you take off your shoes, means you're getting ready for a burial. You put on all white. Those are the clothes of a corpse. We're all buried in our white shrouds. Don't eat, don't drink, don't have sex. Kind of like a dead body. But you're actually not a dead body. You are a risen angel. So that's another one of the most, the deepest, I think, themes for me in Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur. Now remember, for each of these, it has to be a spiritual experience. So when I daven Kol Nidre, I don't just daven the prayers. By the way, right after Kol Nidre, the divine says, I have forgiven them for their sins. If you want to understand where the forgiveness idea comes from that you find in the liturgy of Kol Nidre, please read Numbers chapter 13, 14, and 15. This is the story of the spies. And the Rabbi of the Talmud said, if you understand the story of the spies, you understand all sin. Now, why is that? I'll say a few words about that. They're taken all the way to the borders of Canaan. How long did it take us to get from Mount Sinai to the borders of Canaan? A few weeks, right? We sat for 40 years because we failed the test. It only took a few weeks. We get to the borders of Canaan. The spies are sent out. The spies tour through Canaan, and 10 of the spies get cold feet. They look at the cities, and they actually forget it's their destiny. It's their purpose. God is with them. They come back and they say, it's an ant that eats its inhabitants. Eretz ochel yoshveha. We should go back to Egypt, where there was figs and fish and water and salt and all the wonderful things about Egypt. They actually forgot they were the people back in Egypt crying out to God to get us out of here. Suddenly, being a slave in Egypt was way better than a life of being accountable for your life's mission and purpose. Here I'm borrowing from Viktor Frankl. We not only have the Freudian biological drives, we also have a drive to create lives of meaning and purpose and justice and love, justice, truth, and beauty. Those are also our drives. And sometimes when we are faced with a moment when you really can be a loving person, we go back to Egypt. You can actually be a fair person, a just person. We run back to Egypt. You can actually create beauty with other people. We run back to Egypt. And when you can be a true person, speaking truth in your heart and truth with others, we run back to Egypt. Because Egypt is, if you look at the book of Numbers, chapter 13, 14, and 15, Egypt, in their mind, was comfortable. They wanted we used to say when I was in the military, 3 hots and a cotter. 3 hot meals a day, a place to sleep. Yeah, I'll do anything you want. As long as I have a place to sleep and 3 hot meals a day, I'm up for it. So when the people actually say to Moses, look at all this, we live the easy life in Egypt. Now remember, I'm turning this into a spiritual metaphor. Life demands of you. One of the terms you'll see in Viktor Frankl and all the humanist psychologists is lives of responsibility. Now, I don't say we should think about this all the time. Most of the time, to tell you the truth, I want to have fun. I want to enjoy myself. Rob and I live in the greatest city in the world. We look at each other and say, we live in Tel Aviv. Let's go to the beach. Let's go to the Levinsky Market. Let's buy some unusual food. Let's meet interesting people. So, yeah, we live a lot of joy. We love it here. On the other hand, I think we both live deeply introspective lives where every single day we want to become better people. In fact, I want to say, as a little bit of a humbrag on our part, the amount of depth and introspection we do when we meet people and they say, so what do you mean Reform Rabbi? What's this like? I say, well, the Reform is how much Orthodox law I practice or don't practice. Actually, the least interesting part of me is how much halakha I practice or not. Our focus is inner life. We'll say, well, what does that mean? And we actually can give 10 levels of depth to the question, what do you mean Chaim Pnimiyim? What do you mean by inner life? And we can say a couple of words. They say, what do you mean by that? Well, we don't run out of words because we've been practicing it. We've been doing it. We founded a congregation on these ideals. Or HaTorah was born out of our desire to create a congregation rooted in the inner life dimension, including the teaching, including the music, including the community. I mean, so those of you who love Torah, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't an accident. It was our mission. It was our purpose. It was our vision. And we talked about it all the time. Are we true to our vision of creating a place where the inner life, the experience of God and the soul are constantly present with everything else that we do? The beautiful music and the fun and the cafe, with everything that we did, the core focus was development of the inner life. In our opinion, everything else was more beautiful because of the beauty of the essence, which is the inner life. That was our founding vision. It still is our vision, which is why we wanted to offer these classes 2 weeks ago and tonight as a gift to the community, more precisely, a gift of the Torah supporters who pay our salaries and pay for this microphone and that camera and this computer. We'd love it if you would help support us. This is so important to us, that the deep song, at least our version of the deep song, a widely held version of the deep song, that it's about depth. It's about the inner life. And every single ritual we have has a metaphoric symbolic level and therefore a transformative level. So when the rabbis talked about Yom Kippur, we have the Kol Nidre, and then quoting from the book of Numbers around the molten calf and the story of the spies, say, because, again, as the rabbi said, all of sin can be understood in the story of the spies, also the story of the molten calf, which I won't get into tonight. Because what does the story of the spies symbolize? Your life of accountability and responsibility is right in front of you. Right in front of you. Lives of depth, lives of meaning, lives of purpose, life of love, justice, truth, and being holy is right in front of you. And what do people do? I'll go back to Egypt. And we all do it quite intentionally, quite involuntarily. Why do we cross over and move into our fulfillment? Because we push ourselves, because we drive ourselves. Again, according to Frankl, we have our biological Freudian drives. He says we also have a drive to meaning and purpose, but we don't listen to it. In fact, Frankl says in his book, The Unconscious God, in which he actually meant the God that hovers in the unconscious, there is a drive in the unconscious toward the divine, but we find ways to displace, we find ways to escape. So my prayer for all of you on this holiday coming up to us is if my guidance is helpful, I'm really happy. My guidance from Rosh Hashanah, my guidance for tonight, is that at every place in Yom Kippur, if you go to a Yom Kippur service, by the way, a lot of words, a lot of pages, a lot of poems. I'll tell you what I do. I was recently at the Rosh Hashanah service at the synagogue around the corner that I attend. I also go every Shabbos morning. It's a lot of words, a lot of liturgy. What do? I find my little corner that I sit in, far away from other people. I love the music. I love the davening. It's a charming environment, charming people. But I open my prayer book and I find one phrase, one word that I meditate on. So I'll tell you my recent word. This is actually, Mirav and I have an intermarriage, by the way. Mirav Synagogue is an Orthodox synagogue, about a half an hour walk, where they're singing ecstatically and raising the roof. All right, I'm a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit weirded out by that. Mirav and the girls walk in, and they are trilling and singing to the high heavens. I can hear them from the outside. It is the most ecstatic, wonderful place I've ever witnessed in my entire life. And I've seen a lot of stuff. I've seen a lot of places. I was not ready for this. It's a shtibel on the border between Tel Aviv and Yafo, packed with people, young in their teens and 20s and 30s is old in this place. They're flowing out. They're singing to the top of their lungs. I'm sitting outside with my my fellow old guy buddy, two bearded old guys looking at all this going, what is happening? What is happening? Tel Aviv, like the Sodom and Gomorrah of Israel, has this little synagogue that's overflowing with song and energy and young people. And we're just looking at what we never thought we'd see this night. So that's Mirav Synagogue. That sounds more like Mirav, right? That's our Friday night synagogue. And then on Saturdays, we go to my synagogue, which is a more chill, laid back, kind of quiet, conservative. What's that? Conservative synagogue. The davening is kind of like a nice creek, a nice ocean, nice flow. Cantor's lovely. The rabbi's lovely. The people are lovely. And some of them are really, really, really lovely human beings. So on Friday night, I went with Mirav to her synagogue. I'm sitting outside on the bench, and I'm sitting there, following the service from the outside, and we're reading Mizmor LeDavid, Psalm 29. Mizmor LeDavid, Havu Ladonai, da 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 da. So I sing it since I was a kid. So there's one line that says, Kol Adonai Chotzev Lahavot Esh. Kol Adonai Chotzev Lahavot Esh. So I stopped right there. The voice of God chisels flames of fire. Chotzev Lahavot Esh. Chotzev Lahavot Esh. The voice of God chisels flames of fire. And then I sat there, and I actually sat straight up on this bench outside. I want to make sure I understood it. So my Hebrew's pretty good, but now and then I make mistakes. So there's an Israeli guy sitting next to me. I said, Milah Chotzev. He says, yeah. I says, משהו כמו, like to shape a stone. He says, כן. You don't speak Hebrew? אני מדבר, לפעמים אני טועה, לפעמים he says, no, זה כן, זה ככה לעבוד עם אבן. Wow. I sat there. Kol Adonai Chotzev Lavot Esh. Now, so I think they're meditating the voice of God descending into me, chiseling from using another metaphor from the Psalms, the stone of my heart, and chiseling it into flames of fire. I couldn't leave it alone. I was all Friday night. I'm thinking, Kol Adonai Chotzev Lavot Esh from Psalm 29. I went to shul the next morning. I was actually chanted the Haftorah for Shabbat Shuvah. Incredibly beautiful, powerful, knock 'em dead metaphors. What am I doing over in my seat when I'm not preparing to read the Haftarah? Kol Adonai Chotzev Lavot Eish. The voice of God taking my heart of stone and chiseling it into flames of fire. Bekitzor, I chanted the Haftorah for Shabbat Shuvah, which of course I had to learn it very well. And I went over with me, Rav, and we're just stunned at the beauty of this. The deep song. It's the deep song. Read the prophetic portion for Shabbat Shuvah. Read the prophetic portion for Rosh Hashanah. Look at the Kol Nidre. Immerse yourself in the deep song. Let it guide you. Let it shape your spirit. Kol Nidre, the retreat is over. The retreat is over. The preparation began during Elul, down at the campsite below. We walk through the gates on Rosh Hashanah to the retreat. We go into the retreat. The angel is there, descended from the heavens. We spend 10 days with our angel, everybody else with their own angel, their own light, their own star. And now it's going to end. Now it's going to end. I'm not saying the work is done, but the magical period where you can actually, right, at the impersonal level, admit, confess, apologize, work things through. This is the propitious time to do it. If you've been avoiding it, do it now. Do it now. The gates are closing. The prayer book says the gates are closing. Do it now. Not because we can't do it any time, but this is a propitious time to do it because ideally you've been doing this work. Now, we go from Yom Kippur to Sukkot, Days of Happiness. That is a festival. And Sukkot, you can say Chag Sameach. But during this time, the purists here, I say, don't say Chag Sameach. Say, L'shana tova tikatevu, may you be inscribed for a good year. And on Yom Kippur, Techatemu, may you be sealed for a good year. And how do you get inscribed and sealed? Because you are doing the work. All right, thank you for attending tonight.